I've made a few videos in the last year talking about ChatGPT and how it's useful for language learning as a tool and how it can help people to learn new vocabulary, to test them on their grammar, and all things to do with language learning. Some people I see on YouTube use it as a way to chat with ChatGPT, like I'm doing now to the microphone. You can do this with ChatGPT with certain extensions. However, I never really spoke about anything that was more of the negative side properly, and I think if I'm going to talk about something, especially something that's quite new, such as AI being a language learning tool, I should really give both sides to the argument and really make sure that people who watch these videos understand that there are issues with ChatGPT, and in particular I'll talk about two issues I feel like personally is an issue for me at least when using ChatGPT. And obviously if you have anything else that I don't mention in this video, please put them down in the comment section, and I may even pin a comment if I feel like it was a worthwhile comment to pin. But when it comes to ChatGPT and just AI systems in general, I knew that they were never perfect, and I'm pretty sure I mentioned in my videos without watching them back, I'm pretty sure I mentioned that they weren't perfect and they were a substitute for certain things, and they just help people to kind of get out their shell a little bit more, especially when it comes to the speaking aspect. I did try to actually learn Swedish for 30 days while just using ChatGPT, and that was the idea, was to use it to speak with ChatGPT. Hur länge har du lärt dig svenska? Det låter bra. Varför lär du dig svenska? Jag är ny på svenska. Prata med mig på grundläggande svenska.
Absolut. Jag är här för att hjälpa. Om du har några frågor eller om det är något specifikt du vill öva på, tveka inte att säga till. Hur kan jag assistera dig med din svenska inlärning?
I think after like 4 days I quit because I very quickly realized that it's actually impossible, or very difficult at least, to learn a language purely through ChatGPT, especially when the Swedish I was hearing back was very poor quality and it was a robotic version of the language, and it just wasn't something that I would have got much decent use out of. So that was a video I had and I tried for a few days, and I eventually failed that idea because, I don't know, it just felt like this isn't genuine either or anything, and I felt like I could learn Swedish so much better by doing my typical language learning routine if I wanted to, which would be to read on link and to listen to Swedish and podcasts and YouTube videos, comprehensible input, which is something I'm looking at a lot more at the moment. And I just feel like doing through ChatGPT only kind of showed me ChatGPT isn't as great as what maybe some people make it out to be, because there's a lot of videos talking about how you can learn a language from like 0 to fluent just using ChatGPT, and they give you all these tips and tricks and commands to ask ChatGPT in order to get the language and the answers that you kind of need. At least with my experience experimenting with it while talking to my microphone to ChatGPT for it to then spit back out at me some Swedish, I didn't really find it all that useful. Obviously I did only go 4 days in, but I got a little bit frustrated with kind of how it was, like I say, poor quality with the audio, so that immediately was not fun for me because I was listening to essentially an AI sort of replication of what a Swedish person is meant to sound like. But that's not even one of the things that I wanted to even mention in this video. That was just something that just came to mind. The two things I wanted to mention in this video, okay, so one, the other day, and this is going to kind of expose what video I'm going to be making in a few weeks maybe. I did a comparing the Romance languages, and that video did quite well. And so obviously I wanted to continue that series, and the next one in the series is going to be comparing Celtic languages, which there are only 6 living Celtic languages today. And if you're that interested in them, right now you can see all 6 of them up on screen. I mean, some of them are a lot more spoken than others. One of the lesser spoken ones is Manx. And here, by the way, you have like a comparison. These are all of the United Nations Article 1 translation in each language. I looked at the Manx, and I'll highlight it here. This is Article 1 in Manx, and I've found this on 2 different websites, and it's basically given me the same translation, so I'm pretty certain this is the translation, because actually the United Nations website itself didn't really have like a Manx section, or it was quite blank. I was surprised at, unless I just found like the wrong website, I'm not sure, but I found this on a couple other websites anyway. And so I was quite happy with that. For those of you who don't know, if I go over to the English version, Article 1, I'll highlight it here, I won't read it out. This is what the English version of Article 1 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights says. And they literally translate this as well as all of the other articles into other languages around the world, and it's translated into a whole bunch of languages, which is why quite commonly it's used to translate into other languages or to show languages compared to another. I've seen other YouTubers who use this exact article to read out or to compare, and also the fact it's quite a short and pithy sentence. It kind of gets the point across quite easily, and that's why I decided to use it for my my romance video, and why I'm going to be using it for my other videos comparing languages within the same language families. And so this is the translation I've got in Manx. Obviously I can't read Manx, and would be surprised, to be honest, if anyone who watches this video could read Manx. There's only about 100 native speakers and about 2,000 worldwide speakers of Manx. It is a very unique language, to say the least. Like, not many people speak it, basically. It did die at one point, but anyway, I will copy this and I will go over to ChatGPT and I will ask ChatGPT, and I'll try and replicate what it did the other day, and maybe it's going to get it right this time. But the other day it was an absolute train wreck of the translation it gave me. So I've already given you the translation, which was that English version of the Declaration of Article 1. I'm going to put translate this sentence for me into English. I'm going to leave it, and I'm not even going to tell it it's from Manx, and just see like what ChatGPT can come out with. And I'm curious whether it will give me a similar answer as the other day, or whether it will understand. Okay, here it now recognizes that it's the Article 1. It also recognized that it was Manx Gaelic, or is it Manx Gaelic? I'm not sure, because Scottish and Irish. Anyway, that doesn't matter. It also recognizes it's from Manx. That kind of defeats the point I'm trying to make here a little bit. Let's see if I can find what it did to me the other day. Okay, so like right here, it is slightly different. Some of the words are like slightly different forms and stuff. I'm not quite sure. There was one other website that I found that kind of gave me a slightly different version of this declaration. But at this point, I asked it to translate this, which is like the first part of the declaration. I think it's the equivalent of like this part here, up to dignities and rights. And so I was expecting it to translate that, and instead it says that in English it translates to every animal runs fast and jumps in high steps and turns gracefully. And I just thought, this is so wrong compared to what I was expecting. And obviously I don't know Manx, and so it was hard for me to like try and get to get a picture of like what is right and what is wrong. There were some Manx translators online into English, and so I just sort of translated word for word, and it's not what it is at all. And then I asked to translate into Manx from English, and then I copy and pasted the article, and then it gave me this answer, which is, it looks kind of right, but I mean there are certainly words here, like smooth for example, that just isn't in like my version here. And there were other issues I had with this along this line of like trying to translate something. I really wanted to make sure it was correct for the video that obviously I'll be making and putting out at some point within the next few weeks when I get the time to. And I couldn't trust ChatGPT. And again, I know this is an issue that has always been on ChatGPT, though like translations aren't always accurate. It literally tells you down the bottom, ChatGPT can make mistakes, consider checking important information. Sometimes it's hard to do that when it comes to languages, especially languages that are spoken by a few thousand people worldwide. And so I was hoping ChatGPT would just have that information gap for me to be able to do the translating, and I can't really trust it. And before, I did mention that ChatGPT had this library of like hundreds of languages, and I hadn't actually found a language that it really didn't know how to translate. Even like ancient Egyptian and like languages like that, it just knew how to spit an answer at you. Now I have no idea whether those answers are correct, and I doubt many people do know about ancient Egyptian especially, but the fact that it translated this into the actual article from a brand new conversation, I've never like influenced it before, it was able to actually give me the correct translation. That's a pretty good thing from a language that obviously not many people speak or know of. But the other day, obviously I tried sentence per sentence, and it was just giving me completely different, mixed up, jumbled answers. it's a bit of a mess sometimes. Like, obviously, I know the way ChatGPT works, it just kind of predicts what word is coming next in the sentence, and so obviously things can just be a bit weird with the answers. But when it comes to like language learning, especially like lesser known languages, I think it can be quite dangerous because obviously if you're trying to learn Manx, for example, if it was to teach you what I just showed you a second ago about all animals jump or whatever it was, now I can't remember the translation, it obviously you're gonna probably take that for gospel unless you back up your translations with, not very many accurate translations out there on the internet. So obviously I know that like a lot of people know ChatGPT makes mistakes. It's not perfect for language learning. And yeah, you should check your translations if possible. If Google Translate doesn't have the language, such as with Manx, it's a lot harder to actually see the translations, and you can't just ask a native speaker for every single thing you want translating, because that is just way too much work for the native speaker. And again, with a lesser known language like Manx, or even languages even more endangered, it's hard to actually find people who would even be able to help you translate in the first place. So obviously that's where ChatGPT can help, but it's unreliable. I think with languages like Spanish and German and very well-known languages where ChatGPT has a bigger pool of information to kind of pick from, I see less information being incorrect. Certainly with languages where it's a bit more limited on, of course, there are more mistakes and sometimes just complete gibberish. And so that is something that is worth pointing out with ChatGPT. I know it's kind of obvious for a lot of people who use ChatGPT, but there are people who don't use ChatGPT, and they may not necessarily realize that sometimes it's just completely inaccurate, and it's worth doing your best to try and find other ways of translating what you're looking at. Luckily, in my case, there was Wikipedia. There was also omniglot.com as well, which kind of backed up what Wikipedia said. I also have, in a brand new chat now, asked ChatGPT the translation, and it's translated it without any kind of hints towards it being what it's meant to be, Article 1, and ChatGPT has also translated it. I'm now quite happy that this is correct Manx, and that can obviously go in the video. But if you're using ChatGPT primarily to learn an endangered language such as Manx or whatever else exists out there, I would just err on the side of caution because of this kind of thing. A translation's not being fully accurate and whatnot. The other issue I have with ChatGPT, it's not really as big of an issue, but like I kind of feel personally I've become lazier as a language learner since ChatGPT's come out and since I've started using it. A lot with like languages translate to this language and that language, because it's very tempting just to kind of use ChatGPT as like a translator tool, such as Google Translate or something. And we all know Google Translate was never perfect, but it's certainly got better over the years. Especially when you give it context, it does a pretty good job. But ChatGPT seems to kind of make me lazier as a language learner, and so that's probably just more of a personal thing, but I feel like other people are probably going to feel that as well. When you're being lazy with language learning, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes being lazier can kind of be more effective, obviously depending on the situation and on the person and whatever else. But in this case, like, I've kind of slowed down a lot on my studying time in a language, because like those times that I would spend looking up a word is spent just me asking ChatGPT to translate it and kind of then taking the translation as gospel, which regardless I forget anyway. And I feel like with ChatGPT I forget a lot more information, and in general when I'm on my phone, like just doing language learning, I forget a lot more information than if I was to write it down or if I was reading a paper book, for example. There have been tests to kind of prove that this is the case. And yeah, with ChatGPT, when I ask it to translate and to give me like 10 adverbs, for example, in a language that I'm trying to learn or pick up some vocabulary, and like it's kind of difficult for me just to get any meaning from those words, and so I kind of forget them unless I really employ a certain learning tactic for me to remember those words by seeing them in sentences, to ask ChatGPT to then put them in a sentence. But then if there's an issue with ChatGPT sometimes being wrong, then it's kind of difficult to know whether what you're learning from is actually correct information or not. Because if I asked it to give me a story in Polish and then it gets the wrong like tense, or if it gets the wrong case or the wrong preposition, all of a sudden I'm learning incorrect language. And so ChatGPT is good to a certain extent, but I would still certainly not use it just as like the only tool by far. because ChatGPT may teach you something, but then if you go over into a more certified app which has actual people translating the words, and so you know the translations are more correct, like in many other apps that are out there that are not AI powered, then you just know that, like, if you see the real way of how to say something, then that's, you know, obviously you'll probably realize if it's something that you've seen on ChatGPT as well, and especially if it's something that ChatGPT is kind of giving you the wrong translation for. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, if you do use ChatGPT to kind of translate in the languages, like even in the more bigger and well-known languages like Spanish or German or whatever, it's always a good idea to back up the translations and double check them on things like Google Translate, DeepL, which is another translation service app. If you have the access to ask a native speaker, but try not to overload them, because I feel like that would get very exhausting if someone's constantly asking you, is this a correct translation? Is this a correct translation? Groups on Facebook, for example, you can ask them, you know, like, is this the correct translation? Is it a bit too formal? Whatever. You know, there's a whole bunch of things you can ask people, and with ChatGPT, I think there's only so much it can teach you anyway. With language, I'm not quite sure if it's that good when it comes to, for example, slang. It knows some slang, but I don't know if it's able to put it into sentences as naturally as like a natural speaker would be able to. It would be interesting to see ChatGPT trying to produce English in like a Cockney slang, for example, or like London slang in general, because nowadays, like, a lot of like English London slang especially is imported from Jamaican patois, and so there's loads of like Jamaican patois words into like London, like teenager and young kids slang, which a lot of these young kids and teenagers don't even realize that a lot of these words they use are like Jamaican patois. They just say them because it's how language spreads. But I'd be interested to see if ChatGPT would even be able to produce that, because like, especially slang, but in general, languages are always changing, and so when they change and evolve, you need to kind of try and keep up with it, especially if it's the language you're trying to learn. And obviously ChatGPT only has so much knowledge, and of course it gets capped every so often. It will only learn information up to a certain month of a certain year. It can be good as a tool, but only as a tool. And I would say that for any language learning resource, whether it's a dictionary they have in paper form, whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast or YouTube or whatever, you don't want to ever really do one thing. You always want to try and change things up anyway. ChatGPT is certainly helpful for me sometimes, but I am now a lot more cautious about using it as much as I have done before for language learning. And from here, I feel like I'm going to be a lot more judgmental, or like a lot more critical, or what's the word, like I'm going to question a lot more about like whether the translations are actually correct, rather than just taking what it said for gospel, essentially. And so yeah, I just wanted to make this video to kind of talk about the few things that I've seen as like an issue with ChatGPT. I know there are other things, but my camera battery is running out, and I've got a bit of a croaky voice at the moment, so there's only so much I can do, but those are certainly the points I wanted to talk about in this video today, because I felt like it was really important to talk about those things particularly, especially as one of them, with the mistranslation, was something that I'd recently experienced myself, and I was just a bit perplexed into how it was able to so wrongly or incorrectly translate something that I was pretty sure that it said something completely different. But that, as well as the fact that as a person, I feel like, or as a language learner, I feel like I've become a lot more lazier with my language learning over the last year, especially over the last year, because ChatGPT it just gives you the information there and then without you having to actually work for that information. And I think I need to get a bit more discipline back in my language learning, because I also kind of feel like my languages have kind of slowed down more recently, because ChatGPT has kind of taken over, and it's kind of just now my study method, and it's, I don't know, it just feels like I'm not as active in these languages, even though I do still try to be, and I have other methods that I'm trying out at the moment, such as comprehensible input on YouTube, etc. But I'll talk about that in another video. For now, that is everything for this video. As I say, if there's anything else you think was worth mentioning in a video such as this, where it's kind of critically talking about ChatGPT and the issues it has with language learning, let me know down in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Until then, have a great day, and peace out.